I think a lot of people like to look at organisations, but often go very binary with these sorts of things, very black and white, that there's the right and the wrong. I'm much more of the opinion, and writing the book really helped me to learn this as well and establish my own understanding, that there's shades of grey in everything. There's never something that's a complete absolute. And obviously when we talk about frameworks, oftentimes it's like you either are using a framework or you're not using a framework, but people ignore the underpinnings behind that. There's always going to be culture, there's always going to be dedication, capacity, workload, and the actual product that people are looking at themselves as well, because you could be the best organisation in the world, but if no one wants your product, then at the end of the day, you're still not delivering value.
What is delivery management all about? This is a question that's been on my mind, and I'm sure it's been on yours. So I thought, why not get an expert to have this conversation? And today, my guest is Jonny Williams, author of Delivery Management. I hope you take something away from this conversation, because I certainly did. So Jonny Williams, this is ripped off from LinkedIn, right? So this tests how long ago you actually reviewed your LinkedIn profile. Agile delivery lead and author of Delivery Management, which we'll get into later on. You're an award-winning, outcome-focused agile delivery professional and best-selling author with a passion for creative content and an active interest in digital innovation. And like I've said, this bad person, can't say bad boy, bad person here. We'll dive into that. So yeah, apart from that, who is Jonny Williams and how did you get to the point of sitting here today?
Yeah, behind buzzwords and nice LinkedIn header. I think that in many ways does capture a lot of my interests and those areas that I'm involved in. Really, that space of enabling teams is the sweet spot. That's where I like to work. That's been the background in a number of different guises. And the bulk of my experience that's kind of led up to that point of being able to write a book and working with Red Hat now has really been focused around that space of team enablement. So both initially working in higher education, where I think that was where I gained that first initial exposure to certain agile ways of working, certainly iteration, and especially in that area of kind of being responsible for a product as well, through to them working as a civil servant, which is always slightly daunting to have that crown hanging over your head.
Yeah.
But working as a civil servant for Department for Work and Pensions, and then sort of a semi-civil servant, as it were, working for Homes England. And all of those experiences really have got me to the point where I was working with teams who were doing complex work. And I wouldn't say it was always fixed on software development explicitly, because in part, some of the stuff that I was doing in higher education was more aligned with design, content, and also thinking about CRM solutions, which is a whole headache in and of itself. But all of these things that led up to a point of being able to go, right, well, this stuff is complex and there must be a better way than just planning out a year's worth of work and getting nothing valuable delivered. So those are kind of the, jargony, buzzword, keyword titles that I'd throw into the mix. But really, it's all about making amazing stuff happen with other people.
Yeah, I like that. We'll clip that one up. So obviously the book is called Delivery Management, which, like I said, we'll dive into that. The question is normally, what does agile mean to you? But although that is probably part of it, what, if you were to summarize it, what does delivery management mean to you?
There's definitely a topic there around how much delivery management is intrinsically linked to agile, whether actually you can see the things as being distinct. And I think that's a really interesting topic. Hopefully one that I'll circle back round to, because within the book, I describe delivery management really as being predicated on 3 aspects of enablement. And I think that's the best way of looking at delivery management. So the underlying thing is being an enabler, but the core of it really is coaching, facilitation, and impediment removal. And obviously that can take on different flavors, different lenses, applying lots of different practices and adopting different approaches as well. But I would really look at each of those and say, no matter which flavor of that you're using, is it enabling? Is it actually helping a team? So for instance, if you're walking into a team setting, the coaching angle, if you're giving everyone the hairdryer treatment, you're probably not being an enabler.
Yeah.
Although I would always say, obviously we look at something like coaching, for instance, it's very easy for that to be more aligned with life coaching or professional coaching, but sometimes it needs to be directive. Sometimes people don't just want you to keep asking questions.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that, because there is, if you think about if one thinks about the Agile competency framework,
Yeah.
Like coaching is just a segment of that, and I sometimes feel, especially in our community or the circles we maneuver in, it's all about the coaching, and it's all, like you said, it could allude to the life coaching, but there is such a thing called direct coaching
Yep.
where people, where it is a bit more exactly what it says on the tin. It is a bit more direct. Um, in terms of how you went about writing this, I must say I was lucky enough to see an early version of it, and you asked for some feedback, which is always a tricky position to be in, right? Because you want to be honest, but you also want to be encouraging. And I've got to say, like the progress, it was good in the first place, but what you built upon, and I'm sure well, it says in the book, you reached out to many people for feedback. It's a triumph, and I think it was a brave but really good thing to call it delivery management, because you could have gone down the buzzword thing of calling it agile project management or 12 steps to being the best project manager. And I think going for the brave title should be commended. So I just wanted to give you props for that.
Thank you very much.
How did it come about? I mean, you've obviously had these ideas swirling around. I've seen some of the content you've posted on LinkedIn over the past few years. Was this just a formulation of all of those things into something that you could give out?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the real starting point of the book, I was very fortunate for the roughly 2 years that I worked at DWP, Department for Work and Pensions. Was very fortunate to be part of a very engaged community with some incredibly talented and knowledgeable people. So a bundle of those people, a scary proportion of which were all called Steve. I was very lucky to learn a lot from them, but also be in a position where we could debate ideas back and forth.
Yeah.
So all of that gave me a bit of a sense around what I felt delivery management was, and also seeing a lot of these people who were working in a very similar capacity. The challenge, I think, was that there were also, especially managers that didn't look at it that way.
Mm.
So people who are in those more senior roles, whether it be deputy directors or directors, and the challenge there, and this wasn't exclusive to DWP, it was something that I could see as a universal challenge, was that my lived experience meant that I was saying, well, no, this is what we're all here to do, and being part of a community who was very well aligned, whilst also having people outside of that community going, no, you're not. That's not what you're there to do. And I think that was incredibly challenging and problematic. And then moving into a smaller organization, for me, was where a lot of this sparked up, because when you're in a big place and you've got a big community, it's easy to feel like you've got everyone at your back and go, oh no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to commit to fixed deadlines. I'm not going to force a team to do something.
Yeah.
I'm not going to adopt that command and control kind of approach that maybe is going to be expected of someone if they're doing more project management aligned work. Whereas in a smaller organization and working as head of delivery, I think there were a number of facets of these teams where I thought this is actually hurting people. So whether it was the actual delivery managers themselves, because they weren't quite sure what they were there to do, they didn't feel safe and secure necessarily, whilst also being lovely people who were really switched on, super smart, but a little bit between a rock and a hard place, but also for the teams. Because if someone was getting the order to say, well, no, I need delivery dates, I need a timeline, and you've got to commit to it, and if it goes wrong, you're on the hook, then the person in that role who's being asked to do that is going to put more and more pressure on the team. So I wrote a blog post about the book, or not about the book, about delivery management and the things that I felt were wrong in that delivery management space. So by writing this blog post, it was almost a bit of a venting opportunity for me more than anything, because I was incredibly frustrated with where we were at the time. And I think that was then amplified, where as soon as you looked on LinkedIn for anyone who'd almost have your corner, it was like, no, delivery management, nonsense. It's all top-down command and control. It's just another name for project management. And it was this almost, I'm living something and no one else seems to be aware of it. Why am I on an island?
Do you think they were aware of it but didn't want to be brave enough or resilient enough to sort of not stand against, but hold the mirror up to say the Agile community, Scrum Masters, Agile coaches, because delivery can be quite a triggering word for some people. Have you had much sort of public or private pushback or debate about the delivery management side of it upon release of this?
There have absolutely been commenters and people who've said delivery is just that bit at the end, or delivery is something that we don't want to be talking about in this way. It's not something that should be managed. The idea equally that it's something that a single person shouldn't own. And what's ironic with all of this is that most of the people who go, "Oh, you're wrong, Jonny," are actually people I agree with.
Yeah.
Because for me, when we're talking about delivery, we need to caveat that with the word value.
Yeah.
And so it's actually holistic. It's an end-to-end thing, and it incorporates every aspect of that value delivery journey. And in terms of management as well, I think people jump straight to the idea that it's people management. But when we talk about something like product management, no one's coming out of the woodwork to go, no, product management means you're going to be bossing people around. You're going to be controlling them.
Mm-hmm.
Because people understand really what we're talking about is enabling a product to come to bubble up to the surface, as it were, to come to the fore and actually establish itself as something that's going to be useful for customers. When we're talking about value delivery, it's the same sort of thing. We're not trying to manage the people. What we're trying to do is ensure that there's a context and environment where value can exist and where people can do their best work.
People always like to know this stuff. What was the creative process behind it? Did you lock yourself in a cabin in the woods and not speak to anyone? Was it, over a long period of time? What was the flow to get this onto the shelf or on the virtual shelf?
So I one thing I should probably call out, which a lot of people ask me about, I'm very fortunate to have a supportive girlfriend, but also a supportive girlfriend who has a horse, which means that she didn't care a lot of the time that I was head down on my laptop.
Fair enough.
Evenings and weekends were kind of the main times, and really it was over the course of a year. So I wrote the blog post, which was calling out all of the things I thought were wrong with delivery management and pretty much just jettisoning it. I was almost going, I don't even necessarily want to be associated with this. Maybe we should all be agile coaches instead. So taking that blog post, and I had all these bullet points off the back of it, and I decided to argue against myself.
Yeah.
So the very first draft, which was even before what you saw, Jack, was dreadful. Like, it was rough as anything and not something I'd be particularly proud to put out into the world. But it was a starting point, and I personally found the process of creating something, having a blank page is the worst thing that you can possibly have. So just having that rough version gave me something, again, I could argue with myself, I could tweak it, I could build on factors. And it was really powerful as well to take these breaks and use it was iterative, but probably within chunks. So I'd write something that felt substantial, send it out for a selection of readers, so close friends initially. Then the next wave of edits was going out to people who I knew, but hopefully would give that constructive feedback. And over the course of about a year, it was just shy of a year, gradually tweaked and edited and embedded all of the pieces of feedback that I'd received, some of which was very blunt, but it all enabled the book to be much better. No, but it moved it forward. And I think that process of actually practicing what we preach a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So making it incremental, making it iterative, and more than anything as well, really being cognizant of the fact that it's not enough just to plan it and deliver it. It has to incorporate user feedback.
Yeah.
So I treated it as a product, and I think that's what really helped.
And what was the feeling like when you held it for the first time? Was it, oh, brilliant? Or what was that feeling like?
Part of it was almost like finally, almost going, and some of it, especially as editing, was pretty hellish at times, where you're just going over the same thing time and time again. The feeling of relief of just going, oh, it's done, was that amazing, satisfying thing of being like, we're in production. It's not been released to users yet, but we're in production. And I think that feeling was very similar to what I've had with teams, where we launch a product or you just get to that point. It's so satisfying to see hard work. But I especially think having something tangible made it so much more real. And that was really special.
It's a bestseller, right?
Yeah. So it's been a bestseller in 16 Amazon categories, which anyone who does their homework into Amazon stuff, there's ways to gamify it. There's ways that you can play about. But my hope was that there'd be maybe one category where it did well. But the fact that actually across the board, it ended up in very high ranking spots and number one for 16 was just mind blowing.
Yeah.
So I'm hugely grateful to the support that people offered, the people that have bought the book, and the people that have shared stuff as well on LinkedIn especially, but it's been quite visible.
Yeah, I mean, I was just about to say, it's everywhere, isn't it? There's 2 books that I saw a lot of over Christmas. This one, and then a former guest of the show, Susie Palmer True, her Everyday Change Playbook, available on Amazon. They were the two books that I saw people constantly either screenshotting or taking pictures of. And I think that's like testament to both you and Susie, because it's relatable, it's honest. There's a lot of complexity at times, which is needed. But I also think people need to be able to buy into something that they understand. And yeah, again, just want to commend you for the way in which it's written, because I think it will draw a lot of people in, where sometimes you look at these threads on LinkedIn and, you know, we're like cannibals trying to eat each other sometimes. Yeah, it could put a lot of people off. And then we wonder why, you know, the Agile gets a bit of a bad reputation. So yeah, it's no surprise that it was in a lot of people's stockings over Christmas. Slight gear change in terms of more practical stuff. Where do you think, from your experience, organizations go wrong regarding agility or delivery management, and what are the reasons for that?
It's such an interesting question because there's so many small factors. And I think a lot of people like to look at organizations and acknowledge, yes, they are all unique, but often go very binary with these sorts of things, very black and white, that there's the right and the wrong. I'm much more of the opinion, and writing the book really helped me to learn this as well and establish my own understanding, that there's shades of grey in everything. There's never something that's a complete absolute. And obviously when we talk about frameworks, oftentimes it's like you either are using a framework or you're not using a framework, but people ignore the underpinnings behind that. There's always going to be culture. There's always going to be these aspects of dedication, capacity, workload, and the actual product that people are looking at themselves as well. Because you could be the best organization in the world, but if no one wants your product, then at the end of the day, you're still not delivering value. So for me, I think the challenges boil down a lot of the time to a few common factors, but that can be very varied within that commonality. So levels of trust is a huge thing, which goes wrong in loads of organizations. If there's not a decent level of trust, then things just aren't going to click. They're not going to work. I think arguably as well, trying to do too much at once. So on the small level, thinking about limiting work in progress at team level, but also I've been part of some very large scale digital transformations. And I'd always use I'm very careful with that.
What are they about? What are they about?
Air quotes on digital transformation. Yeah. I think digital transformation is something that has been, you can use it to almost badge up any kind of change. And so you can have someone who's adopting a new IT system and suddenly it's a digital transformation.
Yeah.
You can have people who've gone remote, suddenly it's a digital transformation. What that means is borderline nothing. And I think at the core of it, any successful change or any successful transformation needs a shared picture of reality. It needs that degree of clarity. And if you're slapping on someone else's badge of digital transformation, you're probably not going to have that.
Yeah.
You really need to have these outcomes and these clear objectives or goals, because if your only goal is to change or transform, well, let's all change our job titles, boom, but nothing's actually happened under the hood.
Yeah.
It's just like spray painting your car bonnet. It doesn't actually mean it's going to go faster. So digital transformation for me is something that I think doesn't help us. Much like Agile as a badge sometimes can't be all that productive or useful because people need to know what it means. If you're in the gang already and you've got the membership card and you can go on Agile Specialist or the certification, then it probably means something. But even then, shades of grey, it can be incredibly varied.
Yeah, people need to know what's in it for them as well, don't they? Like, if you, especially as an external person, you go into an organization, people rightly or wrongly believe they've been doing a great job for a number of years, and they've got the receipts to back that up. Like, who am I or you or anyone else to tell them they need to change, right? Because they've got a whole history of success, whether we agree with that or not. Yeah, it takes a degree of buy-in, and people don't. I think sometimes people have a problem with the words buy-in or the phrase buy-in. But I think if you're not bought into something, and if you're not bought into a diet or a health and fitness regime or a relationship, like you said, that trust is going to be fractured from the start. Anyway, carry on. If you were in the sort of the delivery management kitchen, what 3 ingredients would you say that people need to take advantage of either agility or more successful delivery management?
In terms of delivery management, and very purposefully with the book, I wrote about it not from the perspective of you needing to be a delivery manager to use it. So let's say we're in the kitchen. Don't worry, you don't have to be head chef or Marco Pierre White or whoever you are. You can be anyone. And so I think from that like amateur cook perspective, there's still aspects of it that you can use to be successful. 3 key ingredients. I've already mentioned aspects of enablement, and obviously that's a really important thing. So those ingredients of remove impediments, coach people, and facilitate. But actually, if you boil all of that down to what really does that look like, coming back to trust, psychological safety, and openness, more than anything, just being open to learn, being open to experience new things, and not being that person who's going to be on the pedestal or ivory tower, actually just acknowledging you don't know everything.
Yeah. Again, these conversations are free flowing, right? And you just triggered a thought there. Psychological safety. Do you think that's achievable in the workplace? 100%.
I love that question. That's very provocative because I just don't think you can ever fully be there because of the existing power dynamics that are there. It's almost like if we talked about transforming or changing society, you'd have to go back to ground zero. And even then, you'd probably screw it up. Psychological safety, I think, is one of those. It's like a North Star. You can never really reach it, but it's somewhere in the distance you should always be aiming towards. So there's always going to be some aspect, whether it's incentives that exist in the organization or power structures and power dynamics, whether it's the system design itself and the legacy that you may be inheriting, all of those factors. And even in a new organization, you still have the bias of being a man, let's say, being white. I'm dyspraxic, for instance, so certain things that I carry with that. All of those factors mean that you can probably never get to, let's say, 100% psychological safety if that exists.
Yeah.
But where you can get to is a place where actually you can be yourself at work, you can talk openly, you can find a space where you can be human. And I think that's probably the main thing, is rather than looking at each other as machines or numbers or below the neck workers, as it were, it's actually seeing someone as a whole and being relatively integrated as well.
Yeah, I asked that question because it's something I have struggled with and continue to struggle with. Because and a sense of humor and tone is to do with it a lot of the time. I feel like for me personally, and I know other people feel the same, if they brought their true selves to work and it went wrong, that would then decrease their levels of safety and mine. So I think there's always that barrier. I'm not saying that's right. I'm just trying to be as honest as possible. Because when you go to the doctors, for example, you don't care if they've had a bad day or not. You want them to show up in the best way they can to do the job they do. So yeah, I always like to ask that question because it is a difficult balance, I think, especially when you're talking about culture, trust. Does anyone turn up to work in the most authentic way? I think that's debatable. So
it's these versions of ourselves that we often have to wear at work. And I had a good conversation with someone a few weeks ago where we were talking about on reality TV, there's always this manufactured self that exists. And to a certain extent as well, it's a reflection of like an ego state that exists as well, because it's what you're choosing to put out into the world.
Yeah.
I think in that business context or professional context, you're still wearing, even if you're maybe more like you and I, where a lot of work now, we don't have to rock up in a suit and tie, although for a good few years I did. Don't miss those days particularly. But there's still a mental suit and tie that you're wearing. And I have worked in high-performing teams, and I think the teams where we did the best work was the closest that we got to actually knowing our full selves, where there are a few of the guys in the team who made really dark jokes, but we also understood the boundary, and also the people who maybe weren't so much into cracking jokes like that could understand the intent and that kind of stuff.
I think that's my problem.
Yeah.
I don't understand the boundary. But I think that comes from, previous job. You call someone the C-bomb out of endearment. You can't do that in an office without being in front of HR. So, I think psychological safety means different things to different people, depending on the context. But, yeah, interesting question. Any other ingredients you take from that kitchen?
One big thing is, as ridiculous as it sounds, is being less fussed about the labels or being less fussed about the recipe, because it's not actually going to help you make the best meal that you could.
Yeah.
So there's different flavors in every team. Let's say the team is the group of people that you need to be creating this meal for. And I think a lot of the time people think about delivery management as ultimately being something that serves management more than that. I would urge anyone who's trying to apply delivery management to get past that mindset. The most important thing to think about really is the team and being that enabler for the team. And ultimately that then leads back to the customer. And so whether we're talking about users, customers, but those people who are going to be using an end product, there's a trickle down effect. So I would say if you're in that kitchen and you're seeing these ingredients, if you've tasted the sauce and you think it needs something a bit different, don't worry about what the recipe says. And maybe don't worry about exactly what it says on the thing. If you've tried it before and you know it works, someone might not expect you to be putting cardamom into Chinese food, but if you think it's going to do the trick, then put it into the mix.
Outside of the delivery management, project management, agile bubble, what other things do you think are important, outside of that ecosystem?
A lot of the time, it's really easy to get deep down the rabbit hole, especially if you spend a scary amount of time on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And almost start feeling like agile and lean are all there is. One thing I've been trying to do more this year is develop and expand my knowledge of product fully. And I think that has been really illuminating because it drags you away from this idea of the practices and principles of things like agile. And it's one of the aspects in the book that I talk about in terms of value. So really understanding what value is and what value means, which in most instances, you can look at the business and the user split there, but it's just having something that actually helps people. So for me, beyond all of the talk of approaches or practices, it's just really developing an understanding of what is going to help people or society. And I think that's always been a motivating factor for me. Mm-hmm. So it draws down on this idea of fulfillment. So if you can genuinely understand what is going to help people, that directly ties back to a personal sense of fulfillment. So I think those things have become more and more important, especially in post-COVID society, because we had 2 years of being incredibly isolated and anxious and not really knowing what was going to happen. Mm-hmm. And in a world after that, there's still this degree of uncertainty, what stuff that's going to happen with the climate, stuff that's happening with the economy. It's really essential to get a clear image of purpose and understand that you can do something that is going to make you feel okay, not even happy. I wouldn't push for happiness. It doesn't matter as much as just having a really solid baseline level of being able to look at yourself and go, I'm okay.
Yeah. I read a book by, I think, Brad Stulberg called Groundedness. And he was saying that happiness is expectations minus reality, or reality minus expectations. I can't remember, but basically, the lower your expectations, the happier you are.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of rings true to what you're saying there. We want this podcast to be relevant. One of the topics that has come up over the past few days, good for me, not good for the people who are involved, of course, and our thoughts go out to their situation. But you put quite an interesting post about the Captial One situation. Because it's only happened over the last few days, I'll hold my hands up and say I haven't done as much of a deep dive as I would have liked, but and feel free to correct me. Broad situation, they've sort of let go of around 11,000 people who have agile titles, like Scrum Masters, Agile coaches. What are your thoughts? Where have I gone wrong on that?
So based on my fairly, and I will qualify by saying it's probably fairly rudimentary as well, but I've been following it relatively closely because I think it's very interesting what this journey looked like. It was about 1,100 Agilists, and they transitioned away from having Scrum Masters a few years ago. That move is an interesting one because it aligns to an extent with this idea of delivery management. I think part of the challenge when they moved away from having Scrum Masters and moved to this broader thing, which I agree with, and the current Scrum Guide says Scrum Masters and accountability now. It isn't a job title, it's not a role. That's important because of the fact that actually just being a Scrum Master probably isn't enough. There's a whole other set of skills, a whole other set of knowledge chunks, as it were, that you want to bring to the table to be effective. And also, if you're working truly as an enabler, what happens when that team doesn't want to do Scrum anymore?
Yeah.
So I think that was one of the things that's quite wise. The problem with Captial One shifting in that direction to remove Scrum Masters was that they also tried to batch in a whole other load of accountabilities as part of that move to having Agile delivery leads. And so that was the title. They had Agile delivery leads and Agile program managers. As far as I'm aware, there may have been some other Agile roles as well. But in an interesting way, they still wanted to assert that kind of Agile name tag, as it were. So they had this batch of people that were Agilists. The interesting challenge at the moment, obviously, we're in a market where lots of job cuts are happening. So, and that it's happening for a number of reasons. I think at a corporate level, some of the hiring practices you could question and you could probably challenge to say, have you tried to grow too quickly? Did you see abundance in the market because of COVID? And then you've snapped people up, and all of a sudden, the post-COVID thing that I think we all saw was going to happen in terms of the economy has happened.
Yeah.
So there's been too much growth, but you can't actually sustain it. That feels probably like it's the case at Captial One, because it's way too timely for them to suddenly make all these job cuts of losing over 1,000 people without considering the ramifications financially. It feels like that overlaps. But obviously, from an executive perspective, we won't know. It's going to be something that's been discussed at board level or director level. And that's fair enough. It's going to be managed in different ways. I think what they've done is taken the intent of that, knowing that they probably need to reduce their staffing numbers in order to balance the books. Obviously, companies like Apple have taken a different approach. Tim Cook's salary probably taken a nudge from the board, but he's reduced that by about $50 million. So
that's good of him.
Yeah, pretty nice. I'm not sure I could stomach a 50 mil pay cut, but then I'd have to be earning a bit more first.
Yeah.
But ultimately, they've made that decision to remove all of their Agilists with the intent, supposedly, of integrating that Agile ownership into the team. For me, obviously, I haven't spoken to people directly who've been in these teams. I'd be really concerned if the people with the Agile job titles were the only Agilist in a team.
Yeah.
Because if everyone else is doing waterfall or doing other methods of delivery, and you're there just spouting off in a corner about Agile, you're probably not having the intended impact or effect. The concern that I would have is they probably do have a stack of high-performing teams that have integrated these behaviors and practices really, really well. But what about the teams that haven't? Where do they go? And what's the expectation if there's no coaches or enablers anymore? So I think the real loss, and I hope that all of these people who have sadly lost their jobs will find new amazing opportunities, and that they'll be able to thrive in different organisations, or they'll be able to accommodate some of the roles that Captial One have offered. They're trying to place them internally. But I would say the interesting aspect of this is for the teams that suddenly don't have that person who's taking on some of the cognitive load.
Yeah.
So removing impediments, coaching, facilitating, all these things that I personally feel are really important and can help a team move forward. If there's not someone in the team who's going to be picking up loads of that workload, where's it go?
Yeah, completely agree. It'll be interesting. Just to clarify a point that I said earlier on, when I said, this goes back to psychological safety, right? And tone and sense of humor. When I said it was good for me, I meant it was good for the podcast because it's a conversation. Obviously, it's terrible for the people who have been let go. And hopefully, they'll find something better elsewhere, or start their own thing off. I'm not taking away from the fact that having the rug pulled from underneath you as a person in the job is going to be terrible. But it's an interesting conversation, so it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. There's plenty of opinion. I think I saw one person post that that's sort of the point, right? To get not rid, but to evolve from needing that support to it being embedded in the teams. Not sure in a big organization like that, that's going to happen organically and naturally in all of the teams. So to your point, I think there'll always be a need for facilitation or help or someone to think about the continuous improvement activities. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, but definitely not nice for the people going through it.
I do think, just on that point, Jack, the intent behind it, I think if it does align with that idea of the team adopting it, makes sense to a certain extent, but it is a bit like just chucking the baby in at the deep end.
Yeah.
And while the baby might end up swimming, not saying their teams are going to be really junior or in that sort of baby state, but there will be some less mature teams or some new people or some graduates, let's say, who haven't had this before. The real risk is that, personally, I'd rather do training in a training environment rather than the first time that I come out and play a sport I've never played before.
Yeah.
Being with no coaching, no training, and just having to figure it out for myself.
Yeah.
So Yeah, I think there's always value in having these enablers around. I wouldn't be surprised if there are opportunities for people externally to now come in and support. So hopefully the support that does end up appearing in Captial One is the right kind and actually does help the teams that remain to do good stuff.
Well, Captial One, Everyday Agile, you know where to go. Or buy Jonny's book. Bit of a broad question. What have you changed your mind about recently that you never thought you would?
So I did before Christmas. This will probably put some people
Santa.
off of me. Yeah, I hate the kind. Before Christmas, I did some safe training.
Okay.
And I had definitely read a lot of safe documentation before. And obviously, all of the people that talked about safe to say, it's the devil, stay away.
Yeah.
And I was fairly willing, and probably still would be willing, to say, I don't think it's a good idea to adopt it. But at the same time, I do think there's aspects of it that are useful. And previously, I think I would have said that but not meant it, because talking about psychological safety again, probably would have said it but not necessarily meant it. Whereas this time around, genuinely, there are bits and pieces which I think are actually good. So,
such as?
I would say some of the aspects like, this is going to be a tongue twister, so if I stuttered over a normal word earlier, weighted shortest job first.
Yeah.
I hope I get a gold star for actually saying that. So that sort of activity I think can be really useful. There's obviously, it becomes a very useful kind of repository of ideas as well. So I'm not particularly sure that team topologies guys would be overly happy that they're now integrated into safe. I don't think anyone asked their permission, but the fact it's there is a good thing. The fact that it's visible and there's a number of people who are quite passionate safe advocates. If they were to look at safe, I should probably say scaled agile framework, and actually see ideas like team topologies, it's a whole other audience that are going to go, yeah, this is important.
Yeah.
The aspects where I think it probably is interesting as well is they're lagging behind on certain bits and pieces. So their definition of product owner and product manager, I'm really glad that I've done training now to understand why I think that's not great. Because previously I was like, I can just brush this off. But now I understand that actually there's a degree of hierarchy in those different roles. Because in safe, product owner and scrum master still are roles. They haven't quite caught up yet with the actual scrum guide. So things like that are quite interesting. I'm not sure. Part of me was about to say, I actually think delivery management could fit quite well into the framework. But because of the fact that I'm not sure I want to advocate for the framework particularly, because this idea that ready-made out-of-the-box stuff is not necessarily going to really help, especially as you're jumping straight to trying to do this at scale rather than proving it out in a small space first. But nonetheless, I think a shift to these big frameworks incorporating big ideas and enabling people to pick and choose, I think that's useful.
Yeah, I like it. What's next for Jonny?
Continuing book stuff is probably the biggest thing on the horizon. So I do keep getting a few cracks at work about being on a mini book tour, but it's more just that I'm very fortunate to have been invited along to speak to some great people. Recently, I was very fortunate to speak to Government Digital Service, the gov.uk delivery management community. Really wonderful conversation there, loads of tough, difficult questions. And to be honest, I just want to keep doing more of that stuff. So in terms of personal growth and personal development, having the opportunity to be involved in interesting conversations like this one, but also to be in front of people that I respect and admire, if I can keep doing that, and I'm very fortunate to do that as part of my day job, as well as really doing it as part of this book journey. But I'm keen to just keep doing more of that, really, and finding ways to, at the end of the day, help people do what they do in better ways and enjoy it. So hopefully the book has been part of that for people, but I also love the fact that people from all across the spectrum have started to reach out about questions and be curious to learn more about any of the things that I talk about, whether it be on LinkedIn or in the book. So, yeah.
Nice segue that, mate. So where can people get hold of you? Because I really like the week notes that you do as well. But yeah, where can people reach out if you're happy for them to, etc.?
Yeah, LinkedIn is probably the easiest one, to be fair. LinkedIn, I think, especially in a post-Elon Twitter world, LinkedIn for me has become a place where the community is really strong. So just search for Jonny Williams on LinkedIn. The other place is delivervalue.uk. So that's the home of the book, but also home of some of the t-shirts that I had a bit of time whilst editing, pulled them together, and coaching services and that kind of stuff. So for people that want to just have a chat, LinkedIn's a really good avenue, but I'm always happy to hear from people through the website as well.
I'll put the links in the video description so people can head towards there if they want. Anything else you'd like to share, mate? This is your opportunity.
Primary thing is how good it is to meet you in person, Jack. I think it's been a real pleasure to actually speak with you, and for me, it's been a real inspiration to have people like yourself who are sharing stuff openly and building this platform and community through something like LinkedIn. I think community is one of the most fundamental underpinnings to all of the stuff that we do. If you're trying to go out and be this lone warrior who's going to go out and evangelize about new ideas and different approaches, I feel like it's a fast track to burnout if you don't have community.
Yeah.
So whether your community looks like a group of people that you speak with weekly or monthly, or it's a group of people that you muck about in the comment section with, it's still incredibly valuable. So it's one of the key things, really. The more that any of us can do to build out this community, go in with a degree of positive intent as well, which I think feeds into building psychological safety in broad online spaces. If we can go in with a trust that someone's probably not trying to be a bit of a dick, then actually it's going to help us all out.
Thanks for listening to this month's episode. If you enjoyed the conversation, please let us know in the comments. And also, tell your mates, like and subscribe. And I'll see you next time.